Yeah. And on those lines, a tool that's worked, I say it's worked for me. It's a tool. It's a new tool. So I'm not like, it's not one that I've mastered, but came as I've, this mindfulness meditation Buddhist journey has really delved me into like the consciousness and conscious leadership stuff. And I've got a conscious leadership coach now, and I'm in some groups and seeing how I can apply that in other areas with companies and stuff. And one thing they talk about in there is how really to like 100% feel your feelings. And that's something, right, that's for most people, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
And, I think you and I are very similar in our ability, like to, I don't know if you do like Enneagram stuff. You're probably Enneagram 3, I'm guessing, right? Like like a driver, do you know?
No, actually, man, I just looked this up for somebody. I forget what my Enneagram is.
Yeah.
I'll,
Like I'm an Enneagram 3. So like one of the things like not feeling your feelings and like trying to like hide from them.
right.
And, what they talk about is like, hey, feelings, if you actually feel them, they're actually very fleeting. They're like it's 90 seconds at most. If you
Right.
like really let yourself go through it and welcome it.
Yeah.
And then after you do that, you can almost be like, okay, well, why did that feeling come up and what can I do about it? What's it trying to tell me? But trying to do that in that highly emotional state, as you mentioned, that neuroscience, right? We get in that fight or flight and all that, or prefrontal cortex isn't working, all that, sciencey stuff where, and so this experience of feeling my feelings all the way through has been a tough one for me, but it is really powerful. I was actually practicing my speech the other day because I had a keynote I was going to do. I'm practicing, and I had my first dog, Java, who's in my speech, passed away in December. So she just 2 days after her 15th birthday, Java Bean, and so anyway, her ashes and like everything's sitting there. So like as I'm speaking and I was talking about the part in the speech where I talk about Java, and then I walk by her ashes and like this little like with her collar and all that stuff, and I was like, oh, I got really sad. I was like, no, I'm practicing my speech right now. Like push it down, work on my speech, and I kept messing up my speech. I couldn't. I was like, God, and I was like, oh damn it, I'm just gonna have to feel this thing through. And I started crying. I was like down on myself, and I just like really sat there. And then but then you let it run its course, and it was like and I got back to like practicing. So it was like, not saying it's that easy every time, but there was like a very real moment of like, oh, maybe there's something to this.
Absolutely. I definitely, so when I was a kid, being a figure skater, right, and I was very expressive, but I quickly learned that I was too much for some people. Again, Midwest, like don't make other people uncomfortable, or like, just fit in this box because that's where I want you to be. So I learned to navigate around this and not be too much for people and hold those things in. And, it served me in a lot of ways because I was able to have more like the perseverance and grit, and I channeled it in other ways into competitive skating or competitive CrossFit, or just like put my head down and work, that kind of thing. But it really limited me in my range of experience and even understanding of myself. So as I've been playing with bringing it back more, I use the emotions wheel. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so.
Okay, if you Google emotions wheel, anyone who's listening, you'll get the image. It's basically a circle where there's like the inner circle, the 6 core emotions, then a second ring and a third ring.
Okay.
And what you start to understand is that most people's language is very limited. So when you cannot name what you're feeling, guess what? You're going to ignore it and hide from it, or you're going to face it and you're going to fight it, right? Because like it's fear that's coming up. I don't know what this is, so I got to run away from it, or I got to like fight and get angry, or we go to our coping mechanisms. But what can often happen too is that you experience like the second or third ring emotion, but you don't really understand where it belongs. So for example, I was withdrawn and numb for a long time. Do you know where that emotion belongs? What would you say that is under, like as an umbrella?
Fear?
It's under anger. So I thought it was under sadness, but it was actually under anger. And I didn't have an outlet for anger. It wasn't really socially acceptable for women to be angry. It's more socially acceptable for men to be angry and women to be depressed. So in my mind, I thought those two things were linked to sadness and depression. They're actually linked to anger. And so learning that also helped broaden my experience and being able to language my experience. There is now an app that I recommend to everybody. It's called howwefeel.org. Dr. Mark Brackett, he's got a podcast now on YouTube as well. Download this app. You can set an alarm. It'll ask you to, there's like high energy, pleasant, low energy, pleasant, high energy, unpleasant, low energy, unpleasant. So then you select from those quadrants. Then you'll get a whole range of words, and each one has a different shape and a description. So as you're learning to name your experience, you are able to, oh, that's not quite right. Let me check out this word, right? So you're learning as you go. Then what you get to see as well is over time, where do you sit? So if I just showed somebody the other day, I've been doing this since September. I only have 6% and 8% of the unpleasant, my overall emotional experience. So even though I had a harder April, like I mentioned earlier, I still largely had a positive experience. And those negative emotions, guess what the number one is? Tired. It's not negative, excuse me, unpleasant. Tired was like the number one I've selected. And so typically these more unpleasant emotions are at the end of my day. They're at the end of the week. Friday is the worst for them. And Sunday. So now I have an understanding of my emotional like journey through the week. And okay, so how do I mitigate that? That's why I do my digital detox from Friday to Saturday, typically, because it helps me reset and, process and have space for all those things. And it is such a powerful tool. I've loved it so much. And then it gives you little videos to help explain to you, or if you've picked something that's a little bit more intense, how to navigate that, how to process it. And they're like 1 minute, 90 seconds. They're not long. And it's kind of gamified. You can also share it with your friends. So I've got a couple friends on there now. And so when I see something come across that's like, I'm scared or I feel sad, I can go message that person and say, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? And if they don't know, they don't need to, but hey, at least I can reach out and I know. And it's been a really awesome tool because it's designed by psychologists, engineers, and they call it, you're a data scientist, emotions scientist. That's what you are. You are learning about, what your control level is and how do these different variables affect you. And really, our whole life is just a science experiment, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And so that's why I love this app, because it's very powerful to learn. I'm going to share one more thing that I coach who invited me to just pick an emotion from the emotions wheel, set a timer on my watch for 3 minutes, and just sit in the energy of that emotion so that I could experience in a safe setting, right, what that emotion is. So one day I picked boredom. I hate being bored. Oh my God. As a kid, I'd just be like, I'm bored. I had to do something. My brain moves fast. I got to be entertained or learning or whatever. I didn't know how to rest. So I put boredom on for 3 minutes and it was like really uncomfortable. I was fidgeting. I was this. So I just breathed through it, started to pay attention. Where in my body am I feeling this? How intense can I amplify this feeling to? And then after the 3 minutes, it's like, okay, that's done. Now I know what that boredom feels like. So when it started to pop up, guess what? I was able to recognize it instead of going for food, instead of going for Instagram, instead of going for whatever my vice was at the time. I could go, oh, I'm bored. What would not be boring? What could be fun for me to do that can help with this? And it was fun to play with. And the other thing with that is sometimes we don't recognize because we only feel like 10% of the emotion or 20%, like level 1 or 2. And so we can't name it because we don't know it at that level. We only know it at 10 or we only know it at 9. And so being able to recognize at the earlier stages of this sensations arriving in your body, what's happening is so empowering because it enables you to redirect your ship in a different direction rather than just being swept along the riptide of, oh, we're going here now. There's no, somebody's flicked a switch and that's all that can happen. I got to go to 10. There's other ways to navigate that. So that was really powerful for me because I also did not know how to process and name my emotions. I'm much, much better now.
That's a really cool tool. I'm definitely going to check that out because this sort of, again, in this conscious space, conscious leadership, leading yourself, being intentional, being present and feeling those emotions. And I think to me, one of the biggest things about consciousness is about, it's about intentionality, right? It's like living with intention, as opposed to, like you mentioned, being reactive. Like, I feel these things. I feel these, like, where are you going, and being intentional about how you're dealing with that and being in the moment. And so I wonder, you mentioned about when boredom hit and you're like, what wouldn't be bored? Is that the same response of like, well, what about my relationship to boredom?
Yeah.
Like, is that like something you kind of explored as well? Like,
yeah.
What if being bored's okay?
Why is it bad to be bored?
Yes.
Right. Because now I know how to feel it, but I also, so it doesn't scare me into unconsciously choosing a coping mechanism. But now I also, again, limit and serve. Boredom doesn't feel great because I'm bored and I like to do things. But how does it serve me? Well, it lets the dust settle. Like, my nervous system can relax, right? I can all of a sudden, in staring out, early where we're going to go to Barton Springs, it's thunderstorming outside. I love thunderstorms, but I can stare out this window. I'm hearing the rain. It activates different thought patterns. Now, all of a sudden, I get this opportunity to just be restful and be in a different experience. And so it's, I have gotten some of my greatest insights of myself or of a problem I'm facing when I'm bored. I go for a walk now with or without my dog, but no headphones. I just take in the scenery. Sometimes I'll take a earbud and listen to a podcast or an audiobook, but the majority of the time, especially if I'm on a run, what are the sensations I'm getting? Like, I'm not checked out listening to this podcast to get through my run and numb out and disassociate. Because then guess what? I end the hour-long run. It's like, oh, my ankle's really, really painful now. Whereas if I don't have my headphones in, it's little niggle like, oh, maybe I need to be more intentional about my footfall. Maybe my movement pattern has, I was checked out, so I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't running correctly. And so I'm able to catch these things. So no matter what it is that you're doing, you have more and greater awareness. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with being bored. There's also nothing wrong with being angry or anxious or any of those things, because those emotions are data. I like to say it's energy in motion, emotion. And if you stop it, that's when you have the problem, because you're like holding it in, and just like moving water or blood in the body, it has to move or else you get stagnant and things grow that you don't want to grow. And then it gets yucky, and you have a bigger problem on your hands later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned about some of these, fundamental, almost ancient in terms of our, like, I guess, units of time as people that have stood the test of time. We talk about, Buddhism, and it's funny how, whether it's Stoicism or whether it's a different philosophy or neuroscience or consciousness, how, one of those things, a sort of fundamental principle of Buddhism that keeps popping up for me is non-attachment.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like not attaching myself. I'm not angry. I'm not saying I'm a being experiencing this data point that you mentioned. Like, I'm getting data that this is happening. I'm getting these sensations. What do I want to do about it? Right. Like, and I have this, like, I guess we can go deeper. It's our podcast. To even go deeper, like, I have it's not like I think it's right. It's just a thought, a theory. Because as I sort of like meditated on, like, enlightenment, what do they mean by that? And I almost think that, the more you meditate, the more you have mindfulness, and the more you can create a gap between getting the thought, the emotion, the stimulus, whatever that is that happens. And then you have that, even if it's half a second or second of observing that, and then being able to almost start moving from reacting to responding, which is something I work with, like, leaders on too, is like, are you reacting or are you responding? And even if it's a half second or second gap, even just being aware that there is a gap is, in my mind, potentially like what they're trying to describe when people say enlightenment, because that's like true freedom. Like, you're actually in your consciousness is actually in charge now. You're not just responding to a stimulus. And is that what you're trying to get through all these efforts of quote unquote enlightenment? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a thought I had.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think ultimately, why do we, I suppose, chase enlightenment? We want to understand. We are seeking understanding. For you, you're the 3 of the Enneagram, right? That's the achiever. So
Yep.
for you, it's like this thing to achieve, whereas actually enlightenment is a way of being. It's not anything we can like get by doing, really, which is counterintuitive. I'm an 8, by the way. I looked up my Enneagram score.
Yeah.
So the 8 is the challenger. Direct, protective, rebellious. See, there's that rebel word. Confident and goal oriented. But that's the same thing for me. It's like, oh, it's a goal. So if I do these things, I can get there. And a lot of my rewirement, my unwinding is that I'm learning more how to be. So be with the emotion, whatever that might be, how to be with the discomfort and not disassociate and check out. Like when I need to, okay. Like if I'm being chased by a bear or I'm, going to be doing this survival training or something like that. Okay. Or sport, great. When I need to, I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to get it done, but I'm also going to reflect on it. And I'm going to understand why I did those things. Again, consciousness, right? And that's a beautiful thing to be studying with leadership, in my opinion, because why do we do the things we do? That's so important, And so speaking of, why did you start your podcast? When did you start it? Why did you start it? And has that changed at all? Like, has the kind of core focus of the podcast changed? Has the reason why you do it changed? Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I started the podcast about a year ago. Okay. We're at, I think, 50 episodes this week coming out. And, it's interesting you bring up, I guess the why was I like talking about it. I like talking with leaders.
Yeah.
And I call it leadership after hours because the concept was like, it seemed like with business or mindset podcast, it was either like super serious and like nerding out or talking or like super, either super nerding out like the real sciencey stuff, which I do love, but it's either that or like a business podcast that would be really in the weeds on like, well, what's the latest on the HR practices and compliance, but whatever else, right? Or it was like comedian like fart jokes. Like I feel like it's like there's these two kind of like sides, right? And what I was trying to do was like, what if you had a podcast that was like after hours, so almost like think sit down, dark room. And actually, the first few, I had a little studio where it was a conference room that was set up, designed to look like a Mad Men. So it had like the smoky chair, like the big leather chairs, and the idea was like, let's sit down with like if you're sitting down with a cocktail with another leader at the end of the day, and just be like, oh, all right, like let's have an informal, fun conversation about like what's really happening on the ground and what you're really seeing. And so that's the concept behind Leadership After Hours. That's why I started with, because I think there's like let's get off of the, I'm not interviewing you in the sense of like I don't need your pitch. I don't need your I don't need your company's talking points. Like what are you really struggling with and what's really working? And like let's get down to that. So that's why I started Leadership After Hours and what I'm trying to develop as it evolves.
Awesome.
But, yeah. What about you? What about the lounge? How you've been doing that for a while, I feel like.
Yeah. So the lounge actually started as the Pivot Cast. That was the first name. And I would do IG lives. I started in January 2021. And as you can imagine, obviously at that time in the world, there was a lot of change happening and a lot of pivots for people and a lot of people assessing what do they want to do in life and who do they want to be. And, maybe they're leaving industries that they were in for many, many years, particularly in aviation, right? So it was a lot of what big pivot have you been through lately and what's your story and how did you navigate that? How did you get through it? And then it evolved into, I actually took a pause for a while because I started to feel like not as resonant with certain guests that were on there. Maybe I was being a little too kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall in terms of like who I'm going to invite, what topics we're going to talk about and all that kind of stuff. And I was at this point in my own big pivot of, do I continue to be nomadic? Do I pick a place in the US or somewhere around the world to live, or do I go back to Hong Kong? And so I pushed pause and decided, okay, I'm going to give myself some more clarity that I'm not having fun with this anymore. I started it to have fun because I'm really curious and I wanted to learn about people's stories and I wanted to share those stories and help give people tools that were navigating these tough spaces, like, some opportunities to have some insights from those who are also going through it. And then I once I had like, okay, I'm staying in the US, I'm going to look back in the business aviation world. This is how I'm going to present myself. I decided to rebrand it, calling it the Lounge. I chose to kickstart it after I saw Michelle Mace Curran, who also went to Heroic, and her speech changed how I felt about myself and space and several other things. And I had this transformational experience. And on stage, she said she was a brand new speaker. So I was like, how'd you do this? I need to know. So we had a conversation. We hit it off. We became friends. She was my first guest when I kickstarted it, calling it the Lounge. Perfect, right? Like retired Thunderbird pilot. And the reason why I went with the Lounge was because of this bigger concept of our life is a series of flight legs. No flight lasts forever. What goes up must come down. We're going to refuel. We might even change aircraft. We might go to the same place back and forth a couple times, and then we might choose a different destination. And even with that, there's inclement weather. We have alternate airports. There's diversions. Like there's so many wonderful metaphors with flight. So, in the Lounge, if you're a pilot, you're doing your pre-flight there. You're doing your post-flight there. So that's a perfect analogy for how we can assess our lives using things that we already know and having a checklist of sorts and providing some structure. But also, a lot of people have flown in today's world, right? At least in North America, the majority of people have been on an airplane before. If they have not, they understand. They could watch a comedy skit about a safety briefing, or they get it. They know what this means. It's not such a foreign thing that is out of reach. And when you're in a lounge in an airport, you are there with people that are going to all different destinations, and yet you're in this common place to refuel yourself, to rest and recover a little bit, maybe get some work done, read a book, right? And so I thought it was just this amazing analogy, and you feel relaxed when you're in a lounge, so like you, I didn't want the standard, like, I want to talk about your business and how you did that. I mean, people talk about that all the time. You can go listen to one of those other podcasts for that. I didn't want anything that was too ethereal. And so this allowed me to, like, if I invite you into my home and we're sitting in the lounge, we're going to have a really awesome conversation, right? And barriers kind of come down. It's a little bit different, one day maybe I will have a physical lounge that I can then bring podcast guests into, right? And do it that way, which would be amazing, and then you get to play with the sensory experience as we've been talking about.
Yeah. No, you're right. There are so many great metaphors there with aviation and life. And I love the way you put that all together. And then I know we're pre-recording this because we're doing this. Yeah. We're doing the podcast extravaganza right now. You're welcome, world. But you usually do yours live too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason for that, some of it's kind of that legacy. I started doing IG lives to start with. But even once I moved I use StreamYard, it's a great platform and it pushes to the social channels. So it gets me the visibility, but also real life cannot be edited. I cannot push pause and go, oops, erase that. Oops, let's cut out the ums. Let's cut out the swear word. No. When it happens in real life, we have to accept it, own it, pivot, do whatever we need to do. And so that's why I like to do it live, because I feel like we're getting a more truer version. It's not polished. And that's me. I don't want to edit out, what my guests are saying. The other week, my guest's laptop died in the middle of it and she disappeared. And we had so many tech glitches like coming up to it that we were like an hour late in starting, but we hadn't even posted about it. It was the first time. So I just was like, we're just gonna have fun. We're gonna riff. Let's just talk. What do we want to talk about today? Right. And it was a bit of a different energy, but it gave me this great idea of like, hey, what if I have the kind of preset topics on like whatever day of the week, Tuesday, but then on Friday, it's just, hey, come in the lounge. Let's just have a conversation. Maybe it's a different time length. Maybe it's a different, maybe the same guest can do both, but at different times, like different weeks, right? So you get these different perspectives of them, something that's a little more of a curated experience and something that's just, hey, what's most alive for you today in this moment? What do you want to say to people, right? So sometimes those accidents turn out to be like the coolest things.
No, it's totally true. I'm playing with a concept of doing, the interview style, and then we alternating it with more of a curated solo,
Yeah, I prefer that
podcast
too.
episode. Yeah. Have you thought about doing that? To kind of like get your own
Yeah,
stuff out, or?
I have. I mean, you'll notice that, like, I mean, right now we're having this awesome conversation back and forth where we're both giving input, asking questions of each other. And that's kind of how my interviews tend to work anyway. I'm not just like boom, 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 questions to the person. It's more natural. And at the same time, I think it would really benefit an audience to be able to hear your view on just 10 minutes of this topic go,
Mhm.
right? And I just haven't figured out exactly, as I'm kind of thinking about this new format for the Friday, I'm also thinking about doing some of that, and, working on sponsorship for the podcast. And so maybe that creates its own spinoff. Maybe they sponsor the lounge, but then they have an idea for, hey, let's do this, or let's do an 8 series episode on this topic. And so I'm being very open, yes, and to it.
Yeah.
What about you? Have you thought of anything besides just the solo format? Have you thought about how you do your format?
Um, yes. And, one thing that I'm going to try to do more of is getting more of my original intent, which was it's hard and takes more outreach to get like current business leaders on.
Right.
And when you do, they're like super stoked because no one asked them, like us speakers, authors, thought leaders, like we're asked to be on podcasts. We have podcasts. We're all over the place, which is, it's great input. And I think one thing moving forward for the rest of the year, I want to make sure I have a good balance and really reaching out and trying to get leaders on. One of the favorite podcasts I did with my wife. She's a senior sales manager in tech, and again, getting people that are like senior managers, VPs, not necessarily just the CEOs or the founders or the authors, but like get some middle managers who are like in the thick of it, and then and just be like, okay, speak as freely as you possibly can on what do you see and what and that perspective. And I think that's a unique perspective that when you especially listen to this top 10 type podcasts, top 20, which is great, and then there's some really good people out there, but you start seeing it's like oh, it's the same people, in the same podcast. Like, right. Huberman's on. Right, Peter Attia's on. Oh, Tim Ferriss is on. Like, it's just like this wheel of people going to show his podcast, which is cool. But what you're not seeing is like, the person who is, you're hearing like Andrew Huberman, who's running a lab and been doing it for 20 years. Like, what about like the resident who's like trying to run a department inside of a hospital, so that's an area that I'm going to try to shift to, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. For the rest of the year.
Yeah. I've enjoyed a lot of the conversations that I've had with those middle level leaders or like young professionals that are offering that new perspective, right? Because we do communicate differently through the generations as we gain more consciousness just as a species and awareness of, ourselves and the planet and how we relate to ourselves and others. And, all of the obviously, like, even just in the last 50 years with the internet and how things have grown and evolved since then, and how we do business and how we relate to each other and relate to other places and people and ideas. So that's awesome to get on there. Like I had this gentleman who had started a cadet program for kids and under like a lower socioeconomic area, underprivileged, and they got scholarships to learn how to fly. And then I had 2 of those cadets on the podcast, and it was so much fun. I mean, they're like 17 and 18 years old, like graduating high school, and, and their energy with each other, like the girl was more kind of like regimented and, like I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy and a little bit more serious. And then this other kid is like super playful and cheeky and like teasing her. And then she's teasing him back. And, and then they're talking about how they support each other and what they learn from each other. And I was just like, man, this is so cool. And when you go through experiences like that too, it's like that inspires me. And that reminds me why I do this work or why I started this. And, like I even said to my brother the other day, he's 25 and he's pretty terrible at his phone. Like I have to message his fiance to get him to respond to a text message, which means he's off his phone a lot. And he's a film director and he's, very creative. And that means he's not like sucked into Instagram or TikTok or whatever, which is great. But he's like, but yeah, I mean, I could be better, right? Because that's also a tool that could be used in a productive way. And so, the fact that he can even acknowledge and have awareness around it, I'm like, man, I did not have that level of awareness.
Yeah, no, and
What?
it's crazy. The younger generations, because I'm just like, I'm 40. How old am I now? 41. I'm 41,
Oh, you stopped
and
counting at 30, right?
yeah, I'm like, whatever. I don't know. Yeah, and sometimes, sometimes I feel 25, and sometimes I feel, 55. But yeah, I'm like in that generation, like Y, whatever. Like, kind of, it's like I'm the OG millennial.
Right.
Like, I'm a millennial, but like I also didn't have cell phones growing up, or like the internet. So we were in high school, and kind of seeing both. And so yeah, the development, and I think that's why you see, the I guess the conflict too, with each other, because we're sharing ideas at such a rapid pace and things are changing so fast. And there's some benefit to that. There's also some challenges, but yeah, like, people that are in their 20s now or even teens, like they just had the world's knowledge at their fingertips for their entire life. And if they use it in a productive way, they can have, to your point, I feel like such more of a worldly perspective and a grander perspective on things, because they haven't just heard the people in their Midwestern towns perspectives for the 20 years, you know?
Yeah, no, it's and this is why I have a problem with like cancel culture. I had to learn that also. Like when I came back from the US, I was like, what is cancel culture? Because like that didn't exist over there. You can't demonize someone for the things they did 100 years ago because they didn't have the tools we have today. Like, okay, no, they should not have probably, like, I don't agree with slavery. No, they shouldn't have had slaves. But does that mean that we're going to like tear down? Like, that's a part of history. And it's important to recognize that happened so we can have intelligent conversations about it now. We can't just erase it. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm coming at. It's not like we don't condone the behavior, and we agree now culturally that this is not a good thing, no matter what it is. But why are we wasting? Like, let's look forward. Let's use that as the springboard to evolve and be better, rather than like, oh, let's point fingers and demonize what happened back then. Like that to me doesn't serve the greater whole. Like, it's how do we better relate to people that their generations experienced this hardship or this systemic issue? How do we start to have the better conversations now? Again, that hard conversation, the conscious conversation. And now we're starting to have tools how to do that. It's newer for you. You're 41. I'm 36. It's newer for me. He's 25. That's like his day-to-day world. Imagine the children being born right now. Like their level of communication and understanding, and even things like epigenetics and gene expression, that's not woo either. That's reality. Like, I don't understand why people can accept that this happens in like the mice studies, where mice's lifespan, we can see like 6 lifespans and generations in the course of, I don't know, less than a year. But yet you don't believe that it's happening for us. We just have much longer lifespans, and we've only been studying it for however many years. So we don't get, you know what I mean? So I think it's, I don't even know how I got off on that tangent. Sorry. But,
you went cancel culture on me. I'm like, all right, now we're pivoting. We're pivoting.
Now we're pivoting. I got fired up about it somehow. Something like activated that in me. But anyways, here we are.
Well, and the cancel thing too is, which I sort of combine with another thing that's sort of, I think we're pivoting, is the identity politics thing, which is kind of in that same realm to me in this sense. And I think we're swinging back to normalcy, which happens, right? Like we get this idea, like, it's always a pendulum. And I think we're swinging back to having it be more a rational discussion, because I agree. Like, at least when I remember growing up in the 90s, and it was this big push about like, hey, we're all human beings first.
Yeah.
Like, we're all the same. And then let's celebrate differences outside of that. And I feel like there's this shift in some areas of society where they're pushing it toward your identity first and a human second, almost, right? Like your identity or your background is that's more defining for you than the fact that, I mean, I remember when I looked up like the genetics, like it's like 99.3% the exact same genetics of a chimpanzee.
Yeah.
Like much less each other, right? We're like 99.99999 exactly genetically the same. So like, to me, I just think there's more power in focusing on the unity and then be like, we're all pretty much like this. We're all human beings. But outside of that, look at all these different flavors, right? Let's celebrate that. But it all coming back to, but we're all human beings first. Like, can't we come together? I just, and maybe it's my time in the military too, and seeing so much conflict and not seeing things just through, probably for you too, being not seeing things just through an Americana lens of what's black, it's white, it's this. It's like, my God, like with the whole thing about like power structures and some of that stuff that they talk about, like, well, we need to, the disempowered group needs to now you're almost punishing the group that made these mistakes earlier. And I'm like, but I saw that's Iraq with Shia and Sunni, right? You had a minority group that ruled, and they were, Saddam at least came from that Shia, which is the minority in Iraq, and they rule this iron fist. And these other two smaller ethnic groups, the Sunnis and the Kurds, were oppressed. And then guess what happens when that flipped and we didn't have like constructive ways for them to interact?
Right.
It was pile it on. And I've just seen, unfortunately, it's almost like the mice. I've seen, if you let that run its course, where maybe in America that would take 200 years to run its course. Right. I saw that run its course because there was no central government, and it turned into death squads in months.
Yeah.
And so it's just like this concept of just unity and seeing each other as human beings first. To me, I think culturally, that's an area we need to get to. And I think cancel culture is part of the negative side of, let's look at each other as similarities first, almost.
Yeah. And it's like, again, it's just polarizing. And that's not the point of it, right? It's, how do we connect? How can we get curious? I mean, even, hurt people. And so how do we understand that this person who, we're not condoning the behavior, but how do we understand like why it's there and have more compassion? Like, if I were to, with the tools I have now and the level of awareness and consciousness I have now, think about some of the actions I took 7 or 8 years ago. I could demonize that version of me. I could like hate her and just be so like horrified. Like, how could you do that? You are so dumb. At that time, I didn't have the tools I have now. And I had to like figure it out. I was, in the trenches with like mud under my nails, trying to like climb out of a muddy well, and it wasn't working. And I had to, I did the best that I could with the tools that I had at the time. And would I change some of those things? I would have liked to not hurt people. I would have liked to be better in my communication, but I wouldn't be who I am now if I also hadn't gone through those things or made those decisions and learned from my epic failures, right? Maybe I would have had to repeat the cycle a few more times if I hadn't had that experience. And so that's another thing, is like, we then turn this onto ourselves, and that is not an empowering place to be. And that doesn't lead to growth. So, it's not about demonizing and punishing. It's also not about saying it that was okay. It's just, this was the reality. How do we now get better from here?
Absolutely. And, when I nerd out and got super meta, I had on my whiteboard actually, and then I took my whiteboard down, but I would take principles that I thought were like universal truths. Like here's some concepts for me that I think sort of universally explain the way reality is. And one of the ones that I put up there was scale. And I think that's a very underappreciated concept. And I think a lot of times when we do have more ideological debates or conflict, it's because you have two groups talking about two different scales. So you have one group at the individual level talking almost like individualistic, like, man, bringing this thing full circle of, you're right. Like the reality is that someone has come from worse and had less and done more than you will. So where's the excuse, right? Like, your actions do dictate your future, and you are, that internal locus of control you have to have. You are the captain of your destiny. Like, no one else is coming for you. Like, all that is true. And you need to have that expectation at an individual level. But it's also, if you look at, like one, at least that would be, in America, that was quoted a lot, is like, but if you were born, if you take the scale out from the individual to the group, then you look at something like, well, if you just happen to be born a black man versus a white man in America, you're more than 2 times more likely to go to jail.
Right.
Like that's objectively true too.
Yes.
And you have two groups trying to make an argument, one at an individual level and one at a policy macro level.
Yeah.
And if you don't recognize, wait, are we talking about you and I right now? Or are we talking about how do we influence behavior at a systemic level? Because those are two different conversations. And I feel like that nuance doesn't happen enough.
Yes. And I think it also becomes about like me versus you, and I want to win and I want to be right. And my viewpoint is right. Mm-hmm. And again, we are complex creatures. Like I can hold two diametrically opposed ideas and believe both are true within my own being. Right. And so
not everybody can do that though. Not everybody can. I mean, yes, you can. It does take work. I had a neuroscience expert on my podcast one time, and she said something, and I'm sorry, I handed it back, but I wanted to share this with you. We were talking about these concepts, and she said there was some famous scientist quote that basically said, "Hey, you haven't found truth until you've hit paradox." Yeah. And I just I loved that. Like I was like, oh yes, that's so true. Like if you haven't come down to like, could be either. Like you probably haven't gone deep enough.
Yeah. And that's like what it's all about too, because at the end of the day, like what is reality, right? Mm. If I take a Panadol for a headache, am I experiencing reality? Or am I still experiencing reality, but it's like I've just created it myself because now it's different than what it would have been without. You know what I mean? Like there's so many layers, and I go into this. I wrote a whole paper on it. It was really fun for philosophy course. No. But it's challenging your beliefs, challenging your thoughts. Right? Again, back to where we started in the beginning, if like having this thought, I am this, whether that's an emotion you're saying I am or a thing you do, who are you without that? Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried? And how could you experience that difference? How do you experience that paradox? And there was at the conference I was a keynote at in February, the last keynote, he had these coaching questions that he asks like people and his business. And he's got a book, Ryan Leake. And one of those questions is, what is other people's experience of you? How often do you contemplate that? Right. And when you really sit with it, sometimes you're like, oh, wow, I have not been considering this whatsoever. And I've just been doing the things for my experience. And to some degree, that's always going to happen because we are having this human experience with this like self-preservation and the ego and all these complex things that we're going to be doing. Of course, everything I do will also have some self-interest and benefit for me, right? Even being altruistic, one could argue, is selfish because it gives you a feeling that you like and that you get to portray and all of that, right? Flight attendants, is it selfish they put on their own oxygen mask first? No, because then they can't serve the rest of the people on the airplane, right? And so it's really sitting in that and playing with it and asking people. One of the Space Kind homework assignments in the Space Kind leadership program I'm a group lead in, and I've done it myself several times, is what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Go ask other people to reflect that back to you. And it's really...
That's a powerful exercise.
Powerful.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I like that. Yeah.
Really powerful. And you know what's also powerful is to do it periodically, not like once a year, but every couple months, every quarter, every 6 months to the same people and see what's changed over time. I still remember when my mom, like from one class to the next, my mom shifted patience as something to improve and work on, which lifelong goal here, to being a strength. And I was like, what? Really? Really? And then I even went to my partner and he's like, you are much more patient than you were before. And probably her experience of you is you have more patience with her. And I was like, this is a very diplomatic answer. Do you feel I'm patient with you? And he's like I said, you are better than you were before. And I was like, okay, well, there's progress, right? And he's like, yes, there's progress. I was like, and there's room to grow.
and there's room to grow. You're reminding me of another one of the powerful questions I found going through this my conscious leadership growth and study that I've used a lot is, could the opposite be true?
Yes.
And just like whenever you have that, just be like, okay, what's my feeling of? Could it be the opposite true? And the productivity thing we're talking about is what has really helped prod that in me, because it's like, I feel like if my belief is I need almost fear, scarcity, drive, like there's these things I want to get done because they're important, because they impact people. And it is sort of all those things. And I need to feel that sense of drive to accomplish those things. And if not, I should feel bad about it. And it's like, or could it be true? Could the opposite be true, that if you didn't do that and you sat in abundance and you sat in the presence and you sat in contentment, would you get there faster? Like, is it a requirement? And that is the opposite true has been a really powerful tool, kind of along the same lines you were just talking about. That for me, that's worked really well.
Well, this is actually also dialectical behavior therapy. So dialectical behavior therapy is often used in people who are experiencing intense emotions, sometimes who might have some deeper divergences than kind of the average healthy brain, so to speak. But it's an evidence-based psychotherapy methodology to change behavioral patterns. And it's often used in very extreme cases like depression, self-harm, substance abuse, etc. But essentially it's comparable. It's because it's working on acceptance, change-oriented strategies, but it's comparable to this philosophical dialectical process, which you just described. Could the opposite also be true? So you're looking at the thesis and antithesis followed by synthesis. Somewhere in this process, you're going to understand like these two different opposing viewpoints. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to find your integration for you, right? And so it's integrating these opposites. And the other thing is like, is this absolutely true? Whenever you have a thought, like, is this the 100% truth, or could it be proven otherwise? And like following where that takes you, that's also really fun and enlightening to do.
Man, we are almost at 2 hours. This is crazy.
We didn't even get into the like question. We like looked up all these questions. We're like, ChatGPT, give us some cool questions to like diverge on the path of normal questions. I think we just did it on our own.
Yeah. You know what? It was a safety net. We had ChatGPT. We sent each other emails. We're so prepared, and we used probably 5%,
exactly. So
if that.
Like, but this is how it works. Like the preparation process is what allows for it to be easy, is what allows for it to be fun. So that's like, I prep my morning, like my vitamins are laid out, my probiotic, I prep my coffee maker, my water with my lemon and whatever. And then that way in the morning, I just get up and I do it. I don't have to spend 15 minutes like preparing everything and getting distracted. So it's easy and I can do it. And like we prepped for this, so it was just easy. We already knew like what we were going to do. And the same thing with like our speeches, right? You prep all of that time, figure skating or like gymnastics. How many hours go into that prep before the competition? And then boom, you nail it. So I think we nailed it.
We nailed it, man. Well, this was awesome. We'll, I guess, get together and decide when we want to put this thing out here, hopefully soon for everybody. And we'll put each other's contact info into show notes so everyone can get a hold of us and follow. All my Leadership After Hours folks, make sure you go check out the lounge after this and connect with Sarah for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone who follows me, please check out Sean's podcast, connect on socials. They'll be all be there. I do want to do a quick fire round of the 3 questions I typically ask. Okay, so what's your superpower?
Okay. I think mine's grit. I've always been stubborn and stick to it. And if I decide to get through it, we kind of talked about it. It can take it to the extreme where it can become a weakness if I let it go too far. Yeah. But if I decide I'm going to do something and something needs to happen, it gets done.
Awesome. So let's just reframe it to tenacious, because I'm also very stubborn. Tenacious is a little more
okay. I like it. I like tenacious. All right, I like tenacious.
Amazing. Okay, so the second question is, who's on your personal board of directors? The people that you go to frequently for that perspective shift. They can be alive, they can be not alive, they can be fictional, real people in your personal network or not in your personal network, but the lenses you frequently go to go through your process.
Really interesting. So I would say I go to, in terms of outside of my personal circle and even historical, I really like Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, is like one of my faves. I like Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, and I go through things like Buddhism. I go things like the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So that's kind of like that. When you had mentioned these questions, and I saw on your podcast you asked this. I was thinking another question that I ask God is like, whose opinion am I going to let matter to me? Is how I kind of interpreted it. And so I like my wife, my business coach, and my conscious leadership mentor. And that's like, if those three people, if they tell me something, I like, without putting it through a filter,
right?
I'm like, this opinion matters to me. But what's your personal board directors? I'm interested in that.
Yeah. So I love having these questions thrown back at me. So I would say that I have like a wider board that then, based on the situation I'm facing, I'll recruit the appropriate people. So definitely, like, my partner is on there. I've actually lately started asking, what would Sass do? She's my 13-month-old Doberman. Like, because animals are so in the now. They're not thinking about what's going to happen 5 minutes from now or what happened 5 minutes ago. They're just like, I want to scratch right now. I need a nap right now. Like, whatever it is. So sometimes that really brings me into the power of now, in a very visceral way, in a very kind of fun way. Certainly my mom. And I have several mentors through the years who have seen me from like high school age up through now. And so they have this very long-term perspective of me and seen me through my different pivots, and help really good at asking the question that just helps nudge me back onto the path, instead of, they're not dragging me over, they're not forcing me. They just ask. So one specifically from high school, and one very early in my career when I was living in Beijing. And my best friend Brandon is definitely on there, and now by extension also his wife. They have become like, their opinions matter, and I like that as a great question. From the wider spectrum, definitely the Stoics. I'm big into Stoicism. I love filtering things through that lens. I think about like when things were really simple and there's no technology, and in a kind of community environment, how would this be handled, or how have I experienced in my different experiences this being handled? So like, using that lens. One of my best friends and guides from that realm, Parker Sherry, he passed away 2 years ago. So I often, use how he was and how he loved people where they were at and met them where they were at, which is what allowed them to get to where he saw them. Instead of the traditional, I see the potential in you here, so I'm going to force you. I'm going to nag at you. I'm going to demand this of you now. He had this magical ability to hold you here and ask the right question, make the right comment, and make you feel special and valuable and worthy now, even without that other thing. And by doing so, that allowed you to get to the other thing that he could so clearly see. So that was really, really special and powerful. So he's definitely there. And there's a myriad of others. It really depends on, is this a business kind of thing? Is this a personal thing? Is it a romantic thing? And then I might, recruit some other eyes and ears. But
yeah, you gotta have multiple boards for multiple efforts,
right. And at the end of the day,
I like that.
It's still my decision. And what's so great about it being a person I don't actually know, or a fictional character, is I'm putting it through a new lens and perspective, but I am actually guiding myself to that answer. Right. So it's also a very empowering thing of like, I still made this choice. Just using these tools. It's just, it's just a tool. So yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah. One tool I just started using, my business coach told me about, was, cause we mentioned ChatGPT, was AI mental masterminds.
Okay.
So he's like, you can literally go on there and you could say, I'm really struggling with like, what about what I should do with my life through the lens of Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yeah.
From his answer this question, you know, and like this thing, and like have a conversation with different like historical characters.
Yes, yeah.
And I did it, and I was like, this is actually like pretty cool, a little creepy, but like pretty cool to see that. But you get some good insights. It's like what a, you know, as far as positive, negative AI, I'm like, that's a cool usage that I hadn't initially thought of. I just started using.
Absolutely. Actually, one of my guests recently, Mike Mongo, he's written a book using AI, and it's a conversation with Sherlock Holmes, and it's something to do with astronauts. But it's amazing. I was just like, what a concept! Like, it's incredible that we now have these tools. So I could say, hey, from the lens of Marcus Aurelius, all the translations that we have, all of these things that are out there, like, what would you do here?
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And, sure. What should I do for dinner? No, I'm just kidding. Like, you know, you could ask him, you know, bigger stuff.
But you know what really, probably like look at all your social media and all this stuff and be like, this is what you should eat, and be like, that is perfect. Wait, how did you know? Like, it's good and it's bad.
Marcus Aurelius is listening to me,
yeah, exactly.
Along with my iPhone. Yeah, you know, another cool use of AI, real quick, was I had like an AI expert on my podcast, like earlier on. It's been, I don't know, 6 months ago. But one thing he does is he asks his kids in the day what they want, the theme they want for their bedtime story to be. They'll be like, I want it to be about dragons. And then what he'll do is then he'll take the lessons that they're like working through, he wants them to work on, like being a better communicator. And he's like, write me a story this long about using dragons that like teaches this lesson. And he like uses the problems.
That is phenomenal.
And then he has a custom bedtime story for his kid every night. Like, how cool is that?
I need to like ask my mentor to do that for me. Just be like, hey, tell me like a Anthony's Fable bedtime story, you know, like, because then also, you know, you receive it differently when it's in that form, right? Even sometimes with our mentors or coaches, we're like, yeah, that's not what it is. And then like 6 months later, you're like, yeah, that's what it was.
Always, right?
Yeah. Or like, sorry, Mom, when I was 17 and you told me all those things about whatever, and I was like, you don't know. And then now I'm like, yeah, you kind of did know.
Yeah, Mom was right again. Yeah, every time.
All right, cool. So last question, and it's designed for self-awareness. We can come back. I'm sure we're going to do another extravaganza. I feel like that's in the cards.
We should do another one. Yeah.
An alien life form has come to Earth and they meet you. What do they learn about humanity because they've met you?
I think that I am obsessed and driven by making, however people define differently, but for me, how to make my life matter. I think it comes from a place of gratitude. Yeah. Like, I'm just, regardless of what this is, I know it's unique and I'm grateful for it. And I am like obsessed and driven with like making life matter by impacting other people. And I think that's what they would take away from me.
Amazing. But, and what would they learn about humankind?
Sorry. About humankind. I think they would learn, I mean, so I have this North Star theory, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of mentioned it in Gidjo. It's just where I believe every living creature, not just humans, is its most happy, content, and fulfilled when its activities and environment align with its genetic purpose. Mm. And, you know, I mean, plants, animals, you know, like when the pandemic happened, my wife and I got obsessed with the zoo shows. I'm like, Zoo San Diego, Zoo Melbourne. And one thing and I reflected back on this when I was thinking through this is, like, they have to do enrichment activities, right? So like if a lion, they'll give it free healthcare and all the food it wants, but if it stays in a cage and it doesn't actually do lion stuff, it like mentally and physically deteriorates, right? So they have to like fake a hunt for it to go catch something and then they can feed it.
Right.
And so it's activities environment. And so I'm obsessed with that concept. And again, as we talked about, like, we're tribal and social creatures. And so I think they would learn that we are really more of the hive than we are solo creatures. Wow. And they need to, and so if you want to understand humans, you have to think in terms of this communal social creatures where we developed over hundreds of thousands of years to get selfish reward through these reward chemicals through selfless acts. By contributing to the group, we get praise, and that's how we value and create fulfillment for ourselves.
I love that. That is great. That is awesome. I have just written down enrichment activities, and I actually also wrote down simulate hunt before eating. So, like I can't just open the fridge and like grab the thing. I'm gonna just make a little process for myself. So I'm not sitting in my kitchen, delayed the satisfaction, and then feel like I accomplished something. No, but it's true. I have literally written over here, live simply and according to your nature. And that is just a reminder, because when you simplify, like often the sexy answer is this complicated, convoluted thing, and we feel intelligent by it. But simplicity is usually what works. It's what sticks, and it's what feels good. And it cuts away all this unnecessary crap that we don't need. And then according to your nature, right? Like I am designed in a certain way. So if I try to force myself to be in a cubicle or to work in Excel or to, I don't know, whatever the thing is that I would just like suck the soul right out of me, that's not what I should be doing. And for, just like the person who's meant to be in a forest school, they should not be in an office in a suit and whatever. And there are absolutely those people who want to wear the suit and who want to do that. It's not like demonizing that existence. It's just, where are you going to be most in accordance to your nature? Because that's where you're going to shine. So I love that you said that, because we are definitely on the journey of getting back to that ourselves.
Absolutely.
Wrap this extravaganza up.
Also, what I want to hear, so is that how, to throw it back to you, how you best serve, how you represent humanity? Do you think that's it, or would it be something different for you?
So I think that assuming we could communicate, we could find ways of communication. What they would learn about through the lens of Sarah about humans is that we are extremely curious, and we might be quick to react with assumption or be scared of something initially. But with patience and with kindness and curiosity, we can bridge the gap. That we thrive in environments where we get natural light, where we have community, where we are eating real food, not foodstuffs. That we can be extremely simple and extremely complex at the same exact time. That we are emotional creatures, and they may not be, so they would learn about emotions. That we have this yearning to explore and to discover, while at the same time also craving structure and routine. And that we can be extremely frustrating because we act like infants sometimes. So we need naps and we need snacks. That's what they would learn.
Naps and snacks, baby.
Okay, at the Analog Astronaut Conference I was just at, or was emceeing, we did this welcome, like, get to know you exercise in the beginning, and literally we realized that the way to teamwork and harmony, like the answer to the universe, is tacos. Every single group had tacos, and it was just hilarious. So if you want to take tacos away from this podcast, like, that's probably the one word: tacos.
It's like the Hitchhiker's Guide to a Galaxy, right? 42. The answer to the meaning of life is 42. Yeah. It's like, it's not 42, it's tacos.
The answer to the universe is 42 and tacos. We now have an updated, unabridged version.
Yeah, we do. Maybe it's 42 tacos. Maybe that's the number of tacos you need.
42.
Did we just solve the universe?
Tacos. There we go.
I think we just solved it. That's the answer, in case anyone was wondering. It took us a couple hours to get here, but we got there.
This is how we have world peace, through tacos. Okay.
Yep.
You have your marching orders. You have your mission, should you choose to accept it. Yes. May the odds ever be in your favor.
Oh my gosh, Sarah, this is awesome. It was fun to get to chat with you this long, uninterrupted. So thank you for
Yeah.
this. Thanks for doing this. It was a great
Thank
time
you
today.
for suggesting it. And thank you to our colleague, Dr. G, who gave us this incredible idea for our podcast. And hopefully we can see more of these collaborations. I'd love to do this again with you, and also to do this format with other people who have regular podcasts. This is a great science experiment that yielded awesome results, in my opinion.
Yeah, mine too. This was awesome. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Sarah.
thank you too.